I'm so glad that we are having like a horny movie summer. We've got The Invite, we've got I Want Your Sex, we've got the Teenage Sex and Death at Camp Miasma. The trailer for Wicker is out, which I don't know if you've seen, but people are very
Oh,
excited.
it's made its way across my desk. Yeah.
So it's interesting because there's been a real restriction. I've been watching a lot of like 80s and 90s action and erotica movies just because it's a good place to like let my brain relax. And I was like, oh right, we just used to just have tits out and it wasn't a big deal. And it's like it feels like that's starting to come back. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Teenage Sex and Death at Camp Miasma is such a fun movie because it is a slasher movie. It is a queer story. It is a love story. It is a lot of things, including a comedy.
Out here, there are certain nights when you just get this feeling that some psycho killer is gonna chop you up into a million little pieces.
How much of it were you thinking about the audience in a theater as you were making it?
I think more and more every time. Yeah, I think I'm like a funny mix of like pleaser and edgelord. If all I'm doing is making people have a great time, I start to feel like, oh, I need to throw some bombs into the mix. But I love making people have a great time, and I think it's also like my favorite movies are the ones that do that dance, and especially when you're talking about like horror or romance or movies about sex. I love nothing more than the feeling of like, I can't believe they let them do that. The joy of sitting in a room and not knowing where something is going to go, but experiencing it with others and going on this like weird, sexy, strange, profane, taboo journey. I thought a ton about how that would feel, and it's by far my favorite film of mine to watch with people because my previous movies were kind of bummers, and so like Job Well Done is sitting there and everyone being really sad and bummed out.
People walking out really quietly.
Yeah, no, I remember the first time I watched my first film with an audience because it was the pandemic, and so it was a couple months after it had premiered online. Just feeling everyone's anxiety in the room and being like, I guess that means I did a good job. I think there is just something also to like the joy of the theatrical experience. And this is a movie that is like very much in love with the tools and language of filmmaking. And for the first time in my career, they're like striking actual prints of it. We shot the film on 35 millimeter and it will be playing around the country, around the world on 35 millimeter. Yeah, it makes film feel more durational to me, or it makes it feel more like this like circus or carnival show that you're like, oh, I'm gonna like make you this thing that fits on this number of reels and it's going to be magic.
I think like whenever I am making comedy, I feel like the audience is ingrained in my perspective on the thing, but also I feel like when I'm making comedy with other people, it is because I think that we have the same idea of what is funny. And so I don't know if I'm conscious of the audience. I'm conscious of whether like Jane is laughing, and to me that is the bar, and that means that the audience will laugh. So it's kind of like, is it meeting our standard is how I like tend to view it, because if it does, then I think it means it's good.
I love when Hannah makes me laugh.
Me too. Best feeling ever.
And you're very funny in this movie, but for people who haven't seen it yet, it's a very different performance than Hacks. Like, and you've said this, that it's a character who's very unlike you. Can you talk a little bit about finding the humor in Chris?
Yeah, right. It's interesting because like I know like sort of the rhythm and the pace and the way that my personal comedic timing manifests, that Ava's from Hax's comedic timing comes out, but finding kind of a newer rhythm was definitely interesting, especially because the character is just at a like higher energy with like sort of the anxiousness sort of throughout the performance. So I mean, I do think that there are some certain basic rhythms in comedy that are like universal. And I think that like I can think of a couple moments, like the meeting scene where Billy and Chris are talking and Chris asks like, how exactly did you find, decide to live at the sleepaway camp from the first film? And, Billy says like, someone's got to be here when little death comes back.
At the bottom of the lake, where the movies come from, he always comes back.
What? That pause before the what, like that to me is the universal time, like that is the magic time that needs to pass before the word comes out. Like there are things like that I think are just the grand sort of like global universal comedic timing, but I think that like it was a fun challenge to kind of be like, okay, in what way is this person funny and how aware of it are they? Like, is there something funny here that is not intentionally funny from this character? Ava is a comedy writer, and so Ava's trying to do jokes.
Where Chris wants to be taken so seriously.
At times, I think. But also, I think Chris is like, has their own sense of humor too. So yeah, it was a very fun opportunity to be like, how do I do comedy as someone who has a completely different rhythm from myself? It was cool, very rewarding.
Well, also in this, Gillian Anderson is so fantastic. And last night at the Momi, you said that it's not in the script that she is Southern. And it's not that she's Southern. It's like, watching it a second time, I was like, she feels like Dolly Parton by David Lynch.
It's an incredible accent.
Yeah.
It wasn't in the script, and the second I heard it, it was like...
Obviously, this is what it is.
Yeah, it's just like it planted its flag on the character in the movie. No, it really is incredible, because the thing that was there always, and is such a delicate balance, like to me, like the most stressful moment in like editing the movie is when she first emerges from the shadows and like kind of like the movie starts.
Hi. I'm Billy Presley.
It's so bold. And this was always there, that this character was going to be this kind of like, it's not just that she's like reclusive or that she starred in the first film or that she's like legendary. It's that she is like straight out of like classic Hollywood in this way that like is just everything she does is imbued with this like strange elegance. And that's why I wanted Gillian, because I knew she could do that.
Well, speaking to that, we need to talk about fried chicken and dipping sauces. Can you tell me a little bit about that sequence, and I guess kind of finding what the tone was going to be, especially as you're doing the close-ups? And is that Foley work of the squishing sounds? Is that done on set? Like,
yeah, that's Foley. There's a lot of Foley work in that scene. The crunch, the goop, the tear. Beautiful Foley work by Tim Korn and his team at Dungeon Beach.
Are you pitching for a KFC campaign? Because it feels like it's a missed opportunity on their part.
Well, so here's the thing is that there is no product placement in this movie.
I've been hearing
people
some
are like,
people thinking that
oh, this movie is so
filled
much
with product placement.
And
It's
I'm
like,
just
we just like
this
candy,
is love
dude.
Of the game.
We're not. We want to pay respect to the freaking candy that paved the way for us.
And I wrote the
not
script.
a drop of product placement in the
I
thing.
wrote the script for Popeyes. I did. No, it's.
But this is the thing. It's like there was definitely a time where like everything didn't feel accessible, which is part of what I enjoy about the movie. Like, because it's like there are references in there to movies I forgot, and then as I'm watching the movie, I'm like, right, not Sleepaway Camp. Sleepaway Camp is burned into my soul. Like that last image of her mouth, which you guys homage, that is in here forever. It was so fun because watching the movie, there are references, but they are so like obscured through your own lens. So I'm curious for you, when you're like putting this together, how much of that is like thinking about how you're translating this stuff, or is it just kind of like
You just like let things metabolize as much as possible. And there are like a bunch of different levels of what you're talking about, right? There are moments in the film that I think of almost as like footnotes, where I am trying to like draw the eye or the ear to something that I think is interesting. There's like a recently described as a tasteless joke about Jamie Lee Curtis in the movie, but it's like, how can the fact that there is this giant cultural moment and rumor that the most famous final girl was actually like a hermaphrodite, how could that not be like footnoted in this film?
Mm-hmm.
It was so funny because I hadn't thought about that rumor, I think, since college when I heard it. And then in the movie last night, I was watching with a friend and he gasped. And it was very funny because I also think it's a very if you know, you know thing among horror fans and among queer fans.
Totally. But it's, there's that. There are like these the movie is littered with these footnotes that I think I learned it on World's Fair and TV Glow, which is that like I do a lot of thinking about what I'm trying to talk about, and it's not like the work. I don't try to hold myself to like structuralist, like everything needs to be only in the work and you cannot look outside it. In fact, I like really enjoy littering the work with like allusions that I think if you like track them down could like deepen your understanding of like what I am engaging with in the movie. Like another one that like somebody during the notes process was like, what's that line mean? Because it was clearly something that like 0.1% of the audience would understand. But there's this line when Gillian's character talks about having auditioned for The Burning, and she says, "Do you know who created that?" Harvey Weinstein has a story by and produced by credit on that movie, and then also additionally gave himself a, which you never see on film, created by credit. This is very early in his career, and it's like one of many Friday the 13th sleepaway camp slasher knockoffs. This one feels like a little more brutalizing than some of the other ones. The oblique reference to that, even if it is like a breadcrumb, felt worth inclusion because it leads you like directly to this question of like, oh wait, why did Billy leave the industry? Or like this oblique idea of like the casting couch and like, and not just like the movies that I'm referencing as like a fan, but like the labor practices through which they were made, right?
Yeah.
But then there's also just like, oh, I love that moment in Evil Dead 2 where like he gets to the end of the road and there's this like weird matte painted backdrop of a bridge, and I love like certain beheadings and blood geysers, and you know, like the movie is also littered with like remixes of just like so many references that I've metabolized. I make like a really giant visual reference guide to the movie, and I tend to be very specific about like, no, I need this type of mohawk from Return of the Living Dead or whatever it is. And then I just have this team that actually makes the stuff. And so the references, even if they were there at the beginning, it gets like effortlessly remixed into and warped into our world.
As someone who caught a lot of the references, it's like a fun thing to be like, okay, we share a common language, and you get to feel part of the crowd as they're catching that stuff too. But also, as you point out, if there's something you don't get, like, then it's almost an invitation to like come join us. Like it doesn't feel like, well, if you didn't get it, tough times. Like it feels like there's enough there that you can explore that on your own. I'd like to talk a bit about horny movies and like why do you want to be a part of that? Why do you think that we're seeing a resurgence?
When you watch television, when you watch like a TV sitcom, you kind of take for granted that like this is the correct language through which any scene or story should be delivered. And that pervades culture, right? Like we have this very conservative and regimented cultural idea of like how fast something should move, or like what like proper interact, like we're very prudish, I think, in like our conventions. And I'm not just talking about like whether we see tits on screen. I mean like when we think about like what a sex scene is or should be in a movie, it has so little to do with sex as I've experienced it, and especially good sex as I've experienced it, whether that be like the pan to the window and the dissolve, like let's just skirt through this in any way, or like presenting sex as this like discrete erotic act. I mean like I don't think I'm a genius for saying that like usually if we do see sex on screen, it's like male driven in some way. You know, it's like oh, you know. And that's just like that's like actually an opportunity because like I've had so many experiences in my life that I know are like not just mine, right, that I haven't seen. And if you can do the magic trick as an artist of like taking the unseen thing and putting it on screen, and it moves people, or in this case turns people on, that can, I think, be a really powerful and destabilizing thing. I'm really proud of the sex scenes in this movie, especially that one in the middle of the film between Hannah and Gillian. That kind of starts out as maybe what you would think of as a normal sex scene, and then just like leads to trauma because that person literally can't perform a normal sex scene without totally dissociating. and then slowly becomes something else that like actually is her authentically finding a way to be like turned on and present through play and role play and fantasy. I was like, if like to me that's like maybe the movie shouldn't exist if that doesn't work.
Sure.
Like that if that scene makes people feel confused because they're like, wait, this is like really hot, but I've never seen sex like this on screen before. Like, cool job, me.
Yeah.
Hannah.
I genuinely think there's something really interesting to the way sex is dealt with, that you are both romanticizing intimacy, but also addressing that sex is kind of inherently awkward at points. And so like the anxiety that audiences might be feeling with Chris is part of that experience intentionally.
George Bataille, like that's my guy. I agree with his sort of assessment, which is that like sex is about that line between taboo and normal life, you know, and culturally that line changes over time. But when we go into a space of like like sexual fantasy or desire, we are like bumping up because we want to be bumping up something deep inside us that we can't really regulate with our like conscious mind. Like we're bumping up against like what is forbidden and riding that line. And so I mean, I think obviously that the real villain are like the people who think that like there is man, there is woman, and they do this to procreate. Like that's a sexual fantasy. And that's a sexual fantasy that serves like a certain male power structure. And it has visited so much harm on our society and our world by naturalizing itself. By being like, no, this is actually all okay and normal, and like, sure, you can go and like masturbate to like stepdaughter porn on Pornhub, but like, don't worry about that. Like, you're a normal guy. Like, this country has such a sick relationship to its own repression and sexuality, obviously. But yeah, and so like when you think of it that way, it's like, okay, yeah, I kind of get why Gen Z would be like, I'm not interested in any of that. Like, like I don't even want to look at that. And then add in like computers and like, then now you're like looking at like tentacles at like age 10 and you're like, well, maybe I like those. It's just like, of course, like it's crazy, you know, but it unfortunately is like basically a human need and drive, and like and yeah, maybe even like the source of like how we make and change our world. And so we need to like look it in the eye, and the best way to do that, I think, is to be like, what are the freaky things that I'm like trying to push down, and is there a way for me to explore that in a space that doesn't hurt other people, but that actually like is intimate and makes me feel less alone, and you know, like I can share pleasure with others. I don't think that's just something for like the kink community or the queer community. I think that the world would be a lot healthier if everyone was more honest about like their weird sex stuff.